And those people live longer because when we have those feelings, stress goes way down. In a way, positive psychology is a newer branch of psychology that's, instead of looking at mental illness or difficulties with the mental, emotional, psychological aspects of our health, it's looking at how do we work on practices that build attitude, that supports resilience and connection, and the deeper values that help us through the ups and downs of life. And it's kind of pertinent to what's going on right now. So I wanted to talk about, if we took the word happiness and we looked at a spectrum of what happiness meant in terms of lifestyle, I want to talk about how do we go from sort of the chocolate bar happiness, like immediate pleasure happiness chasing, or what some people would call the hedonic treadmill that we're all kind of programmed for, to look for pleasure in life, whether it's something we eat or something we see or something we hear or something we touch, anything sensorial, to the deepest level, longest lasting level of happiness, which many people coin, best described as the term joy. So if you think of the very most pleasure seeking happiness, which is momentary and it comes related to our senses, and it happens through a sensorial experience and is met through a release of hormones that bathe our brain. These are the feel-good hormones, endorphins, like dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. We get a feel-good moment through the neurons of our brain, and we call that happiness. And humanity has chased happiness ever since the first beehive that we came across hundreds of thousands of years ago. So the very first time we touched even something sweet or fatty or salty to our tongue, we are actually created from the taste buds of our tongue to also release those same neurotransmitters, so that we keep seeking out certain substances for our survival. Glucose to run the brain, fat so that we could store fat and get through long cold winters, and salt because it's a key electrolyte. Without sodium, basically we die. All three of those taste bud flavors are in mother's milk. And soon as we first came out into the world and drank from mother's milk, we set up the firing of those taste buds to the release of dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin for a survival response, to be able to find those three key survival elements through the oral intake of our life. And then, of course, we got oxytocin when we snuggled up against our mother and we breastfed, because oxytocin is a bonding feel-good hormone. And we got dopamine when we learned something new, when we were with our tribal others. Or we got dopamine when we got a social cue. And this is where social media fits in, because every time we open something up into social media, we actually get a dopamine release. And the idea of a thumbs up demarcation on some platform of social media that we're connecting with gives us a social cue and a dopamine drip that allows us to feel happy. So we have an emotional moment of happiness. Now, if the thumbs up came down because of our photo that we placed on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, then we can spin off in the other direction, because the opposite of happiness is basically suffering. When we don't get happiness, we chase it. When it doesn't last long, we look for another place for it. We're so wired neurologically to be having these feel-good hormones bathing our brain that we'll chase our tail through all kinds of habits, obsessions, attractions, and addictions to avoid discomfort. And we'll do that to look for happiness, typically through our senses. Is all of that making sense to you guys? Okay, so if I'm addicted to Ben and Jerry's Cherry Garcia, that's just because those guys are smart enough to put in fat in the ice cream, sugar in the cherry, and the salty bits of the chocolate that are in there. They know, the laboratories that make all of the pretty much fast food and processed food in our world know that those three key ingredients have to be in there. And then people get the dopamine drip, a moment of happiness, a break from cortisol and stress, and then they'll eat another scoop or buy another carton. And that's no different than wine and guacamole and chips. It's just the way that we're wired. Now, if we go from the very, very most momentary spectrum of happiness to the longest lasting lifestyle of joy, I want to touch into the places in between. Because it's a continuum of different experiences that we weave into our life, into lifestyle, and that we bring into practices in our life that affect our attitude, our resilience, our groundedness, our connectivity to others, that allow us to ride the ups and downs of life. Because just like after I run out of that tube of Ben and Jerry's, then I'm going to have a bit of a down, because that dopamine stops dripping, and then a stressful thought comes into my mind, or a thought of loneliness or boredom or any kind of discomforting thought, and then I'm not in happiness anymore. So the second level of increasing happiness is to savor. So if I'm eating my Ben and Jerry's and I put one spoonful in my mouth, and I take the time to notice where on my taste bud palette things are igniting, and I savor the flavors of the textures and the smells as they waft up through my olfactory system, and I truly become present in the experience, the pleasure level of that ice cream goes up exponentially. So it's not just a quick in and swallow and a quick drop of dopamine in my brain. I'm actually taking all of my being into that sensual experience. And that could be sitting and listening to opera music. That could be going for a walk in nature. That could be dancing. That could even be actually work. If we're doing our work and we're savoring the moment of our creativity or our problem solving or our learning, we're in a deeper state and we're more integrated, we're in the moment fully, and the level and depth of happiness goes up. Does this make sense?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. Any questions so far?
I got a question, Kirk. So oftentimes I'll find myself, say it's, in my case, less Ben and Jerry's, more cookies. I'll find myself at the end of the plate, and that's when I realize, oh, that's when I have that mindful moment. So do you have any tips or tricks of like, how do you do that at the beginning rather than when it's all gone?
Well, there's been a lot of research about this, because it does affect how our relationship to food and eating, and then, our health ultimately. So of course, one of the tricks is, if you're picking up some food in a spoon or a fork and you put it in the mouth, you take the utensil and you take it out of your hand. And that forces you to pause. Because the first step in mindfulness is to pause. So rather than putting the next load of ice cream onto my tongue, I pause, put the spoon down, and then I take the moment to chew, move the food around in my mouth, feel the taste buds, feel the textures, and that takes me more sensorially present. So the same thing with the cookie. I could take a bite of cookie, but then I'm going to take it out of my hands.
So it starts with a conscious strategy.
A conscious strategy to pause. Mm-hmm. Mindfulness cannot happen without the pause.
And then the goal then that those strategies become habit, and it becomes just, then it becomes more natural.
Yes. And so if we were to go to a monastery right now and live, that's part of their life. There's no way that you could brush your teeth or eat in a mindless kind of flow or rush. Everything is done carefully, mindfully, and presently. And then that creates mindfulness in our day-to-day living, which brings more presence, of mind and body in the moment and more depth. So savoring is really the first step in the path of mindfulness. Savoring every single sensorial pleasure, because we get the reward of the pleasure. The depth of the pleasure goes up rather than just biting the cookie and then taking another bite and then reaching for the second one, which I've done too. And then all of a sudden at the end of the play, you go, wow, I barely tasted it. Or I'm into my second glass of wine. I don't even remember finishing the first one. We all can get caught in that kind of faster rush of life, that pace that takes us out of the depth. And so we want to pause enough to get the depth. The third step after that, or tool to invoke into our life to get deeper, longer lasting happiness, working towards joy, is to practice things in our life that put us in the moment so deeply that we lose track of time. We're so immersed in either, like say I'm gonna play my Bansuri flute. I can't really watch a movie while I'm playing my Bansuri flute. I totally shut everything down and I'm focusing on my technique and my embouchure, and I'm working on my breath, and I'm in full absorption. And I go into what's called a flow state. I could do the same thing kayaking along the shore of Kootenay Lake, or rock climbing, or my wife Andrea is a painter, and when she's in the creative process, there's no time. She's pretty much working off the right side of the brain. The truth is, though, we can be in the flow state again at work too, but it's an immersive state when our learning edges up a bit. So eating the cookie, there's really no learning edge. All that we're doing is just going for a deeper flavor sensational experience. But when we're learning something that takes us out of the edge of comfort, where I'm learning and having to be really focused and present, that's when we get in the flow state. So it often has to do with activity or creativity. You can't be in it watching Netflix. You can't really be in it reading a book. You're in it when you're engaged in it with the body. Looks like Donna wants to get in else.
Okay.
So in that engagement, basically, there's growth, there's learning, there's deep, deep presence, there's no self-judgment, and there's no opportunity for mundane thoughts, discursive thoughts to be bubbling up and taking away our focus. So it's focused, present moment, engaged, hi Donna, and learning. So if I'm rock climbing and I'm reaching out of my normal comfort zone for that longer reach, I'm so in the moment, I'm not thinking about taxes, I'm not thinking about what's for dinner. That's the flow state. Does anybody can relate to what I'm talking about? Anybody have anything in their life that they do regularly enough to be in the flow state?
Well, the woman I live with believes she can multitask. And actually more than multitask, she triple tasks. I mean, she genuinely believes that she can do this, that she can talk on the phone about serious subjects and be playing a game on the computer at the same time. And I have the devil of a time trying to explain that I don't think that works, but she feels she can do it, juggle it.
What studies at Harvard had learned in about 3 years ago, basically through functional MRI studies of the brain. And I tell you, we've learned more about the brain in the last 20 years than the last 200,000, is nobody can multitask. Doing a task fully and presently requires focus and concentration. And currently, with all of the inundation tools that we have, our concentration focus time is dropped to 8 seconds. So the typical North American who's working day to day has about an 8-second attention span. And That's 1 second shorter than a goldfish. It takes 19 to 26 minutes to come back to the same level of focus. If I'm reading a report, really focusing on all the details of the report, and then my phone buzzes me and I answer it, and I finish the call or the text and I come back to the report, for my mind to come back to that same level of concentration and focus takes 19 to 26 minutes, and that's for men and women. Now, there is something congenitally supportive for women, and I don't mean to be sexist in this, but it's a survival element in the differences in the way our brains work, is that women can multi-focus, but no deeper depth. And that was a survival strategy. So they're watching the baby, they're picking the berries, their senses are up for bear predators, and they're able to move from focus to focus, more typically focused, more capably than men. And this is a generality. Mostly men are like shooting a bow and arrow, are singularly focused, uber focused on the present moment when they're in a hunting mode, whereas women had to multi-focus, in a way multitask, but they still couldn't, nobody can concentrate any better or deeper between the sexes. When we're focusing on something very singularly focused and we get interrupted, 19 to 26 minutes. Does that make sense, John?
Makes sense.
Okay.
You want to talk to her, maybe?
Well, you have to talk to her if what she's doing is a problem. I mean, my wife too, she's on her tablet doing a game if we're watching a movie and I'm nudging her going, did you just see what happened? And she said, oh yeah. And I'm going, wow, how could you? But she can, because I think her eyes can go here and here faster than me, you know, here to there or whatever. But that, going back to happiness, flow state, I highly recommend doing a creative pursuit. And it can be creating a beautiful meal. That's a creative thing too, or gardening or whatever, where you're really immersing in the present moment in an action, in an activity. And just notice how you feel. Usually when we do something creative, we feel good. We lose a sense of time, and we feel fuller, and we feel a sense of accomplishment, and we have less self-judgment usually. We're just in the moment. And that builds part of our character and our attitude towards life. And it adds in our pot of positivity the capability of more resilience. So in the ideal world, we want to be doing something for ourselves on a weekly basis that way. It's as important as working out in the gym.
Working out counts? For what you're saying?
In certain flow states, like say you're learning Tai Chi or Qigong, or you're doing a flow state of yoga, and you're really, really present, you know when you're in a flow state is that your mind and your body are one. And the idea of time has fallen way back here somewhere. So each of us will find a different flow state. And like I said, you can even do it at work. So yes, you could do it in gym. But if you're in gym and your mind's wandering off while you're doing your repetitions, then you're not in flow state. Mm-hmm. What happens is our egoic thinking mind isn't present when we're in flow state. Our witnessing mind back here that's witnessing what we're doing super in the moment to moment intensity is what's running out of the brain.
So like Kathy's hip class would be it's just only focusing on that.
Especially if you don't do it regularly and it's not a habit for you and you're learning it at the same time, then you're in flow, okay. Right? Where's she moving her body now? I have to follow that. That can be flow.
Okay.
Okay. So then after pursuit of pleasure, momentary pleasure, to savoring pleasure and dropping into deeper intensity and fullness of the present moment, and then practicing doing with mind, body in the flow state, then we go into what do we do to build positive attitude. And these are practices that have been researched by people primarily. We looked at people who are older, people who post-retirement seem to have that kind of attitude where they might even live alone, but they're happy. They have practices in their life that allow them to be open-hearted, to be present in connection with others, to feel a sense of fullness and well-being in their life. And those people live longer because when we have those feelings, stress goes way down, immune system goes up, sleep is deeper, digestive system works better. And so all of the contributors to longevity on a physiological level are affected by our state of our mind and attitude. If we're under constant duress or self-criticism, self-loathing, self-doubt, basically we're increasing cortisol, and there goes those feel-good hormones, and then we can go into even worse states like anxiety and depression, and then our immune system is shutting down and our sleep goes for shit, and basically we don't get that long, full well-beingness that some people can take right up into their hundreds. National Geographic did a great study on this. It's called the Blue Zones. I highly recommend just checking it out and reading it and learning about how the Ithacans of Greece and the Okinawans of Japan and the Villicabambans in Ecuador and even the Seventh-day Adventists in America and a couple of other places in the world where there's high percentages of centenarians, the Sardinians, they have certain lifestyle aspects that are in common, and some of them have to do with attitude. They have a high social life. They usually have a spiritual, all of them have a spiritual practice. So they have a sense of purpose for their life. They live very simply. They stay connected to extended family, and they work until they die. There's no such thing as retirement. They have purpose. Now, some of the things around what they weave into their spiritual life is things like gratitude. The practice of gratitude, 3 thoughts of something you're thankful for, measurable saliva testing, lowering cortisol. Just 3. So consider doing 5 before you go to bed at night. It might help you sleep deeper. Because if cortisol's up when we hit the pillow, basically it crushes melatonin and we go into insomnia. So a little practice like that woven into our lifestyle has a domino of positive effects. They did a study in Japan with teenagers who are the most myopic period of our life is our teenage years, because our brain is being rewired from the age of 13 to basically 21. And so we're discombobulated, we're sleeping on a completely different time schedule. All the neurons are completely replaced in the brain in those years. And they did this study in Japan where they got them to go out and do random acts of kindness, 5 a day. And they came back, and the ones who counted, then could count with a little clicker the amount of kindness acts they did. It could even be just a smile at somebody on the street. Their sense of happiness went up. The people who didn't count their acts of kindness, no change in happiness. So there's something about generating connectivity and kindness to other beings. We're wired for that in the limbic brain, the mammalian social emotional brain of our brain. And if we do for others, that's where volunteerism comes in. That's where being a benefactor or a mentor comes in. That's where we just give of ourselves to others. Happiness goes way up, completely measured all the time. And again, another lifestyle component of those centenarians. Another thing that's really helpful for us to build resilience is to have self-compassion. We need to do some basic self-analysis of our strengths and our attributes, a non-comparative analysis, and a very non-judgmental, just like equanimous look at what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses without judgment. And then knowing what our strengths are, we can draw from those like out of a tool bag when we bump into difficulties in life. The difference between self-esteem and self-compassion is very important. Self-esteem in our culture is based on comparison. Self-esteem is looking at things like how special I am compared to others. And it works really well when everything's going well for us. But if we go through a loss of a job or a loss of a loved one and an end of a relationship or things like that, we can be totally rattled and lose resiliency if our sense of self isn't based on compassion. Self-compassion is looking at our positive and negative qualities equally, knowing that we're all human and we all make mistakes and we all have positive and negative aspects of ourselves, but we don't just self-loathe over the mistakes we make or the wishes that we were different. We just hold them like we're a human being like everybody around us. And we hold them in a place from what we might say from a mindfulness place of non-attachment. Okay, so there's not a preference. I don't want to just think about all my goodness without also knowing that I also have sort of a shadow side to myself as well, just like all of us as human beings do. And if I can hold the whole spectrum of myself, then I can also hold the whole spectrum of others. I'm not so judgmental of people around me. I can go, yeah, I could be mean too sometimes, or I could be selfish sometimes, or I could be angry sometimes, or sad, or disappointed. These are normal human feelings. And if we can hold that wider, larger spectrum of ourselves, again, we can move through the ups and downs of our life without being rocked so completely and thrown into states like anxiousness or frozen states of depression. Does this make sense to you guys?
Yeah. And Kirk, do you have any suggestions for, you know, how to get yourself out of that, I guess, almost obsession of when something goes wrong, like as opposed to saying, oh, everything is a disaster?
I do.
How do you get that balance back to pull yourself back out of it?
This is where the practice of meditation is super helpful, Sinead. So it's easy for me to just say, I can hold all the aspects of myself. I can't all the time. I'm up and down depending how the wind blows and my moods are and the thoughts that generate happen and what happens outside in my external world all the time, because I'm mostly running from my egoic mind that wants everything to be just so I feel safe and secure. But if I can practice even 5 minutes a day where I just sit, and maybe I focus my attention on my breathing or a candle flame or the sound of waves moving or water rushing on an audio recording, just something I fixate my mind on. And then while I'm fixating or concentrating on that stimuli, I notice that thoughts arise. And as the thoughts arise, if I start to just notice them, they're all over the map. They're often about myself and self-doubt or self-criticism. They might be even about blame of others. They might be about how I feel like a victim or how I've acted like a perpetrator, or they're all over the spectrum of humanity. And once I watch that for myself, I realize that this is just the nature of mind. Mind just does this. The small mind, the egoic mind, is a constant thought generator. And none of us are any different than this, not even the Dalai Lama. His mind is the same as ours. It's just that he's put in enough practice time that he knows the nature of mind so he doesn't get sucked into it so easily. Because when I sit for my meditation and I notice the thought arise, if I can just label it as thought and let it go without any concern about its temperament or its content, and just know it's just a thought, I can witness and let go. Witness and let go. Sometimes though, a thought will arise and it'll turn into a sentence and then a paragraph and then a story starts. And I'll catch myself partway through the story and come back to focusing on the breathing or the candle or whatever I'm focused on. And I can realize how easy it is for my mind to trip out on all kinds of content, including self-doubt, including self-loathing, including victim feelings. And the more I can observe that, the less potency they have. The more we observe the part of our mind just generates thoughts and thought feelings, the less attached we become to the content of those things. And then the quicker we become to catching, oh, that's my mind again. So I make a mistake at work and I start to generate some self-doubt or some self-criticism, and maybe into the third self-criticism, I catch myself and go, oh my goodness, there's my mind again down that storyline. I'm going to take another breath, come back into my body and let it go. And this comes over time through the practice of concentration or meditation. The act of letting the thought go helps us not to get so fixated on things.
Great, thank you.
Okay, my pleasure.
Sinead, I've been practicing a little trick for that. And it does follow suit with what Kirk's saying about practicing and increasing that skill, because it does take that moment of recognizing. But it's telling yourself, okay, I'm angry or I'm anxious or I'm frustrated, and saying to yourself, let's just see how long I feel like that. So it's accepting that you have those feelings and being okay with it, because like Kirk's saying, we're human. We all have that.
That's
But
exactly
recognition
correct,
is
Alex. Yeah. In the deepest state, we would allow it. So what Alex is saying is recognize, allow or accept, and feel it, own it, and then let it go. It's not all that we are. It's a part of who we are. But it doesn't need to run our life, especially if it's an energy draining thought or feeling, like self-doubt or self-criticism, those kinds of things. So journaling is helpful for this as well, Sinead. So
Okay.
noticing these things and journaling helps us tracking or noticing curiosity, compassionate curiosity. These are all parts of bringing more and more mindfulness into our humanity on a day-to-day level. Now, the fourth and deepest level of happiness, where joy tends to arise, or sort of fifth, would be where we connect to values in our life, the deep things that resonate in the core of our being. And that could be values like family, love, freedom, equality, any of those things that really resonate for you, and you start to orient your life around them, and you start to foster them, and you start to build a purpose. See, the people that have purpose, and whether it's tied to religion or not, or a philosophy or not, or a group of people or not, but a sense of purpose where there's something beyond my me-ness that I'm living my life towards and for, they have the deepest resilience in life. They also have the deepest level of peace, contentment, and joy, those deep, lower base levels of values. So it's not the happiness that comes from dopamine, from putting something on my tongue that comes and goes, and sometimes I'm happy and sometimes I'm not because I don't get what I want. It's more that I'm, as much as I can, tailoring my life to my values and towards a deeper purpose for where I can give my attributes, gifts, and skills to the world through. Doesn't have to be through work. It could be through parenting. It could be through writing poetry. It could be through could be working at the soup kitchen. It doesn't matter. But where we're giving to others. And in that giving outside of ourselves, we start to grow the heart bigger. And when we grow the heart bigger, we become more empathetic, we become more compassionate, and we actually spread happiness. Another study was done where they realized that people who practiced empathetic giving was felt by friends and neighbors. The friends and neighbors' happiness went up 25 to 30% for doing nothing, just because somebody was practicing kindness, compassion, and service next door to them. We're so wired socially through that limbic brain that that resonance of expanded heart sense and connection through what we're doing for others is felt immediately by others. And their sense of happiness goes up with it because we're so tribal. So we're going right from taste bud, dopamine, to savoring into the moment deeply, to practices of being fully integrated and learning something and doing something with the mind body in the present moment in that flow state, to then building positive attitude practices like gratitude, meditation, mindfulness practices, counting, doing kindness acts for others, which is basically building compassion, and then reflection on ourselves, to then purposing our life, giving it purpose, doing at least something towards that purpose on a daily basis. And then our life becomes so full and so full of well-beingness on the mental, emotional, psychological level that the body's health follows it. And this brings us to more longevity. The body follows the mind, and the mind infers to the brain, or sorry, the body infers to the brain through the vagus nervous system, and the mind can impact the body on our attitude, with our attitude. I'd like to just put it out because we're a small group. Are any of you doing any of these practices, or is there anything else you're doing in your life that you feel is contributing to more joy, deeper happiness in your life, more resilience, more battery full than battery kind of depleted?
I just started gardening.
Nice.
And I think it's half because I have some gardening that needs to be done, and half because we were either talking about it in one of the previous health talks, or we read an article about the mental health benefits of gardening. And it is amazing because I think you do enter flow state pretty quickly and easily, because you are doing something. I'm learning it still.
Yeah.
It's a little bit creative. I'm trying to make sure things look nice.
Yeah.
And it's pretty basic. You know, you're pulling weeds. It's been really nice.
And Alex, like nature bathing or forest bathing, nature immersion, there's something in the unseen world that actually brings health benefits from gardening and going into nature. When we dig in the dirt, there's all kinds of microbes and spores and aromas that burst out into the air that we don't see with our eyes. In fact, we get lactobacillus, one of the best gut flora bacteria, right out of the dirt. Once you start gardening, you're breathing in lactobacillus. It'll go right through into your lungs, absorb through your blood system through the lung, and you're going to pollinate your interior guts with one of the most powerful positive bacteria. And the same thing going for a walk in nature. You're breathing in the pheromones from the oils that are being emitted from all the conifers and all the deciduous trees and all of the pollens from the flowers and the plants. All of that's going into our body and improving our immune system. We came from the earth and we are wired for it for our health. On the other side of that, or just to give you a further example of it, there is no asthma in Africa. Autoimmune illnesses in Africa are almost non-existent. The countries that have the highest rate of asthma and autoimmune, and asthma happens to be one autoimmune illness in the world, are Scandinavia, the cleanest, most sterile countries on the globe. We are meant to be in nature and breathing in and absorbing through our skin and being part of the elementals of the earth. That's part of what feeds all of the positive bacteria in our system and supports our immune function.
Bye-bye.
I'm going to have to sign off now too. I could take one more question if anyone has one.
Kirk, is there any reading, whether it's books or any other articles you would suggest on this topic?
There's a lot of research coming out right now, Sinead, through many of from MIT to Harvard to Stanford, all kinds of universities are studying what's going on with the brain when we do this, this, or this. And that kind of information is now supporting things that have been studied, but have been, you could say, adapted by societies and philosophical groups and spiritual groups for millennia. So we're now seeing, like going back to the centenarians, that what, say, these Okinawans or Sardinians are doing as simple farmers or fishing people actually can be proved through science. So I can't really give you, start with the Blue Zones. It's a great inspiring place to check out 9 basic lifestyle components that are common across all of these people. And it's just a good reflection point to see, am I living some of those lifestyle points in my life, or could I add them in? And then check out meditation. I can't tell you enough how, as a simple practice, and don't think you have to go and meditate for 2 hours in some kind of weird position or anything. Just 5 minutes alone, quiet in a chair, and just concentrating on a candlelight is a way to start. And just notice what arises and allow it and let it go. And then notice what arises, feel it, hold it for a moment or two, and let it go.
I heard something a couple of years ago that helped take the pressure off of meditation for me. I talked to enough people who say, I can't get to that state. I just can't. And it stresses them out.
Yeah.
And I heard someone once say, the practice is the practice.
That's right.
So in a sense, just trying to do 5 minutes meditation, whether you get anywhere or not, that's the point.
And even for meditators that have been meditating for decades and decades, they'll still have a period where their heads are just full of thought. And then the next day, it can be as serene as a still pond. So it changes for everybody. It's just the way the mind works. And like Alex says, it's just knowing that that is the mind, so that we don't take it give it so much import. And we build our witness, our bigger mind.